You are not gonna believe the audacity of the heroine in today's story. Imagine looking a Lycan king in the eye and telling him to hush. That is exactly what we're getting into today. But before we step into the Lycan king's territory, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. It helps our pack grow and ensure you never miss a new release. I want this comment section to be buzzing today. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you tuning in from? And while you're listening, timestamp your favorite parts. If a scene makes you laugh or swoon, let me know right when it happens. Are you ready? Let's get into the story. The Alpha King's growl died in his throat, and for the first time in 3 centuries of Ironclaw dominance, the Great Hall fell into a silence so absolute you could hear hearts hammering against ribcages. Ragnar Blackthorn, 6'5" of predatory muscle and barely contained violence, stood frozen mid-roar, his mouth still open, his wolf still raging, but no sound emerging. The human girl in silver chains had done the impossible with 2 simple words: be quiet. Death hung in the air like a blade about to fall. The entire pack held their breath, waiting for their Alpha King to tear the insolent human apart, to paint the stone floors with her blood as a reminder of what happened to those who dared challenge wolf authority. Instead, Ragnar Blackthorn threw his head back and laughed. It started as a low chuckle that seemed to vibrate through the throne room's bones, then erupted into full-bodied laughter that echoed off the vaulted ceilings, genuine, delighted, and completely unhinged. His gold eyes blazed with something that looked like fury and exhilaration had a baby and named it chaos. Make me, he roared between laughs, the sound rattling the weapons mounted on the walls. In that moment, everyone in the Ironclaw stronghold knew something had fundamentally shifted in their world. The Alpha King did not laugh at defiance. He crushed it. He destroyed it. He made examples of it that mothers would whisper about to scare their children into obedience for generations. But now, watching their king circle a chained human girl like she was the most fascinating thing he'd encountered in centuries, the pack realized they were witnessing either the beginning of a new era or the prelude to absolute catastrophe. Possibly both. 3 weeks earlier, the Northern Territories had always been painted in blood, human blood mostly. For 3 centuries, the Ironclaw pack had ruled the Shadow Pine Mountains with teeth bared and claws extended, their alpha line unbroken, their dominance unquestioned. The current Alpha King, Ragnar Blackthorn, was a walking apocalypse wrapped in muscle and arrogance, the kind of man who could silence a room by merely entering it. His wolf was legendary, black as a moonless night, eyes like molten gold, and a growl that could make grown men reconsider their life choices. The humans had learned to stay in their villages, behind their pathetic wooden walls, praying the wolves would find their livestock more appetizing than their children. It was a delicate ecosystem of terror, really, predator and prey dancing to a tune written in snarls and screams. Then came Melis of Thornwick, and the music stopped. In the village of Thornwick, nestled against the southern edge of Ironclaw territory like a nervous bird perched on a wolf's paw, Melis spent her days doing what 23-year-old women in doomed border villages did, pretending everything was fine while preparing for everything to go catastrophically wrong. She worked at the village's only apothecary, grinding herbs with mortar and pestle, mixing tinctures that might cure a cough or ease a fever, and trying very hard not to think about the fact that her grandmother's stories were becoming less like fairy tales and more like instruction manuals for survival. "You have your father's stubbornness," her grandmother, Alara, said one evening as they prepared supper in their small cottage. The old woman's hands trembled slightly as she sliced vegetables, not from age, Melis knew, but from the weight of secrets that grew heavier with each passing year. "And your mother's common sense, thank the stars," Melis replied, stirring the pot over their fire. "Which is why I'm not doing anything reckless or stupid." Alara's knife paused mid-slice. "The old blood is old," Melis interrupted gently but firmly. "Buried. Forgotten. Just like you taught me. Nothing stays buried forever, child. The wolves don't know anything because there's nothing to know. I'm just another human in another border village, living another unremarkable life." Melis forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Perfectly ordinary. Completely forgettable. But even as she said it, she felt the lie settle uncomfortably in her chest. Because Meleys of Thornwick had never been ordinary, no matter how desperately she pretended otherwise. When dogs stopped barking at her approach, when horses calmed under her hands, when the village hunting hounds followed her commands without hesitation, these were signs she'd learned to ignore, symptoms of a gift she'd spent a decade suppressing. The Thornwick bloodline carried something ancient, something that predated the territorial wars and the centuries of violence. Her family had once been Thornwick Silvermane, noble mediators blessed by the first moon goddess with the ability to command wolves with nothing more than voice and will. The gift had been bred nearly out of existence through strategic marriages and deliberate dilution, hidden away like a shameful secret. Nearly, but not quite. Meleys had first discovered her abilities at 13, when a charging boar had threatened the village children playing near the forest edge. She'd shouted "stop" without thinking, pouring every ounce of fear and desperation into the word, and the boar had frozen mid-charge, its eyes glazing over with confusion before it turned and lumbered back into the woods. Her grandmother had found her standing there, shaking, staring at her own hands like they'd betrayed her. "Oh, child," Elara had whispered, pulling her close. "The old blood runs true." Since that day, Elara had taught her to bury it, to lock it away, to never, ever let anyone, especially the wolves, discover what she could do. Because according to the ancient laws, a human who could command wolves was either meant to rule beside them or be executed as a threat to the natural order. There was no middle ground. No peaceful coexistence. Just power and death, dancing their eternal waltz. The Midnight Raid. The raid came 3 weeks after that conversation, on a night when the moon hung bloated and red in the sky, a blood moon, the superstitious called it, though Meleys preferred to think of it as aggressively atmospheric. She was working late at the apothecary, grinding dried lavender for sleeping draughts, when the howls began. Not the distant, mournful sounds they sometimes heard from the deep forest, but close. Predatory. Purposeful. The village bells started clanging in alarm, and Melis's heart dropped into her stomach. By the time she reached the village square, half of Thornwick had already gathered in various states of panic and inadequate weaponry. Torches cast dancing shadows across frightened faces as the village elder, Marcus, stood before a half-circle of wolves in their human forms, though human was generous. They stood too still, moved too fluidly, and radiated the kind of barely contained violence that made your lizard brain scream run. Leading them was Fenrir, Ragnar's beta and apparently the pack's designated extortion specialist. He was built like a mountain had decided to become a person, all broad shoulders, thick neck, and the kind of face that looked like it had lost several arguments with stone walls and held grudges about it. "Double tribute," Fenrir was saying, his voice carrying that particular growl that suggested his wolf was never quite fully submerged. "Effective immediately. The Alpha King requires additional resources for the winter preparation." "Double?" Marcus sputtered, his face going pale. "We can barely manage the current." "Then manage better." Fenrir smiled, showing too many teeth. "Or we'll take what we need directly. Your choice." The village had been preparing for this, in the way doomed communities always prepare, stockpiling resentment, desperation, and very poor decision-making. Someone in the crowd, probably young Thomas who'd been drinking courage from a bottle all evening, shouted, "We won't pay." Several others echoed the sentiment, their voices cracking with false bravery. Meleys, standing at the edge of the crowd, felt the situation spiraling toward violence, with all the inevitability of a cart rolling downhill. She should stay quiet. Should blend into the crowd. Should let someone else become the wolf pack's object lesson for the evening. Instead, she heard herself say no. Just that. One word. But it cut through the rising noise like a knife through silk, clear and sharp and absolutely, catastrophically stupid. The crowd parted around her as she stepped forward, and she caught her grandmother's horrified expression from across the square. Elara was shaking her head frantically, mouthing "don't," but Meleys had already committed to this spectacularly ill-advised course of action. Fenrir turned toward her, his eyes narrowing. "What did you say, human?" "I said no." Melis kept her voice level, conversational, like she was declining a second helping at dinner rather than refusing a werewolf extortion demand. The answer is no. We're not paying double tribute. We're barely surviving as it is, and you know it. The other wolves stirred, exchanging glances that ranged from amused to confused to hungry. Fenrir studied her for a long moment, then began his transformation, a partial shift designed for maximum intimidation. Bones cracked and reformed, fur rippled across his skin, his face elongating into something caught between man and beast. It was the kind of horror show that evolution had never intended, and it usually made humans either run screaming or collapse in terrified submission. Melis watched with the expression of someone observing a mildly interesting, but ultimately disappointing street performance. When Fenrir's transformation completed, he let loose a growl that had once made a full-grown bear apologize and back away slowly. It resonated in chest cavities, triggered fight-or-flight responses, and generally reminded every living thing within earshot that they were made of meat and wolves were very good at processing meat. Melis sighed. "Are you quite finished?" she asked, her voice carrying that particular brand of exhaustion usually reserved for mothers dealing with their fifth child's meltdown. "Only, some of us have work in the morning." The square went silent. Humans didn't use that tone with werewolves. Humans screamed, begged, occasionally fainted. They didn't sound bored. They certainly didn't look at a partially transformed beta wolf like he was a toddler who'd just discovered the word mine. Fenrir's wolf eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in rage, then widened again in confusion. He clearly hadn't prepared for this particular scenario. His intimidation playbook apparently skipped the chapter on humans who are thoroughly unimpressed. "Chain her," he snarled finally, doing what all confused men do when their authority is questioned, escalating. "The Alpha King will deal with this one personally." Two of the younger wolves moved forward with silver chains, because werewolves were nothing if not committed to their aesthetic. The metal burned where it touched Melis's skin, and she felt the old instinct rise in her throat, the command that would freeze them in place, that would make them drop the chains and back away. She swallowed it down, locked it away. Grandmother was right, the wolves couldn't know. Not yet. Maybe not ever. As the chains closed around her wrists, her grandmother pushed through the crowd, her aged face twisted with fear and something else. Recognition, perhaps. Or resignation. "Child," Alara whispered urgently, gripping Melis's arm. "Don't speak. Don't challenge. Don't." "Don't what, grandmother?" Melis interrupted gently, seeing the tears gathering in the old woman's eyes. "Don't be myself? We both know that ship sailed 23 years ago." The grandmother's hand trembled as she touched Melis's face, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "The old blood runs true then. Blessed or cursed, I never knew which." "Neither," Melis replied with a sad smile, covering her grandmother's hand with her chained ones. "Just inconvenient." As Fenrir's wolves dragged her toward their horses, Melis caught one last glimpse of her grandmother standing in the torchlight, looking suddenly ancient and terribly afraid. The old woman's lips moved in what might have been a prayer or might have been a warning. Either way, Melis suspected she'd need both before this night was through. Chapter 2. The Bone Throne. The journey to the Ironclaw stronghold took 2 days of hard riding, during which Melis learned several important things about werewolf hospitality. 1. They didn't believe in bathroom breaks. 2. They found human discomfort hilarious. And 3. Fenrir held grudges like other people held dinner parties, frequently and with great enthusiasm. "The Alpha King doesn't like humans who think they're clever," Fenrir informed her on the second morning, his voice carrying that special patronizing tone men reserve for women they're about to watch die. "He especially doesn't like humans who embarrass his beta in front of an entire village." "Then perhaps his beta should consider being less embarrassable," Melis replied from her position slung across the back of a horse like a particularly defiant sack of grain. "Just a thought." Fenrir's jaw clenched. "You won't be so mouthy when you're kneeling before him." "Bold of you to assume I'll be kneeling." "Everyone kneels before Alpha King Ragnar." "I'm sure that's very impressive at parties." One of the younger wolves, a gangly youth named Eric, who couldn't have been more than 19, snorted with poorly suppressed laughter. Fenrir shot him a glare that promised push-ups and possibly light maiming later. The Ironclaw stronghold came into view as they crested a ridge overlooking a valley of ancient pine forest. It wasn't so much a castle as a fortress that had decided castles were for people with functioning self-preservation instincts. Built from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, the stronghold sprawled across the valley floor like a sleeping predator, all sharp angles, defensive walls, and the architectural equivalent of a warning growl. Charming, Melis muttered. Very, I'm compensating for something chic. That's the seat of Ironclaw power, Fenrir said proudly. 3 centuries of unbroken dominance. 3 centuries and you still haven't discovered interior decorating. Tragic, really. They passed through gates thick enough to stop a battering ram and tall enough to make you reconsider every life choice that had led you here. Guards in partial wolf form flanked the entrance, their eyes tracking Melis with the kind of hunger that suggested the stronghold's meal plan left something to be desired. Inside, the stronghold was exactly as welcoming as the exterior promised, which is to say, not at all. Stone corridors echoed with distant howls and snarls, torches cast aggressive shadows, and every wolf they passed stopped to stare at the chained human with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt to that special look reserved for things you're planning to eat later. Popular place, Melis observed. Do you get many tourists, or am I special? You're about to be dead, Fenrir corrected. But sure, let's call it special. They descended into what Melis mentally labeled the dungeon of dramatic symbolism because every torture chamber needed a theme, apparently. Here, Fenrir left her in a cell that was less room and more geological depression with attitude. The silver chains were replaced with iron shackles attached to the wall, and a guard was posted outside with instructions to alert the Alpha King immediately. He'll want to deal with you personally, Fenrir said with unmistakable satisfaction. Probably make an example of you in front of the whole pack. Very educational for the younger wolves. How thoughtful. Will there be refreshments? Fenrir's smile was all teeth. Oh, you're the refreshments. After he left, Melis took stock of her situation with the kind of practical pessimism that came from a lifetime of expecting disaster. She was chained in a werewolf fortress, scheduled for execution as entertainment, and her only viable escape plan involved something she'd spent a decade learning to suppress. Well, she said to the empty cell, this is going splendidly. The old blood stirred in her veins, that ancestral gift pressing against the mental walls she'd constructed. She could feel the guard outside, his wolf, his instincts, the tether of dominance and submission that connected all pack members. One word, properly spoken, and he'd unlock the shackles. Another, and he'd help her escape. But then they'd know. The secret her grandmother had died a little each day to protect would be exposed. And according to the old laws, a human who could command wolves was either meant to rule beside them or be executed as too dangerous to live. Melis had read the ancient texts hidden in her grandmother's cellar, the ones written in languages so old they predated modern kingdoms. The Thornwick Silvermane bloodline had been mediators once, blessed by the moon goddess to bridge the gap between human and wolf. They'd maintained peace for generations, their gift respected and honored. Until the Purge. 300 years ago, when the territorial wars began and power became more important than peace, the wolf packs had turned on the mediators. The Silvermane family had been hunted to near extinction, their gift declared too dangerous, their very existence a threat to the new order of alpha dominance. The few survivors had gone into hiding, breeding the gift out through strategic marriages, teaching their children to hide what they were. The family name had been shortened to just Thornwick, the noble heritage buried under layers of mundane peasant existence. But genetics were stubborn, and occasionally the old blood surfaced strong enough to matter. Melis traced the iron shackle around her wrist, feeling its cold weight. She could break free. Could command every wolf in this stronghold if she wanted. Could walk out of here and possibly start a civil war in the process. Or she could wait, stay hidden, and hope the Alpha King killed her quickly. Neither option was particularly appealing, which seemed to be the theme of her life lately. She was still contemplating the various flavors of terrible decision when she heard footsteps approaching, multiple sets, moving with the coordinated precision of trained warriors. The cell door opened, and 6 wolves entered in human form, each one radiating the kind of casual violence that suggested they bench-pressed boulders for fun. "The Alpha King will see you now," the lead wolf announced, his voice suggesting this was not a social call. "Excellent," Melis replied. "I've been meaning to discuss his interior decorating choices. Very cave troll meets anger management issues." The wolf's expression didn't change, but she caught the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. Good. If she was going to die, she might as well be entertaining about it. They unchained her from the wall but left the shackles on her wrists, silver this time, because apparently they'd decided she needed both the pain and the aesthetic touch. The walk through the stronghold's corridors took on the quality of a funeral procession, with wolves stopping to watch as she passed, their eyes gleaming with predatory interest. Finally, they reached a set of massive doors carved with scenes of wolves tearing apart their enemies in what was either historical documentation or a very specific kind of motivational art. The doors swung open, and Melis got her first look at the Great Hall of the Ironclaw Pack. It was designed for maximum intimidation, which was either very effective or trying way too hard. Melis couldn't quite decide. Soaring ceilings disappeared into shadows, torches cast violent dancing shadows across stone walls, and mounted weapons decorated every available surface like a very aggressive interior design choice. Pack members lined both sides of the hall, hundreds of them, watching with expressions that ranged from curious to contemptuous to hungry. And at the far end, elevated on a dais of black stone, sat the Bone Throne. It was exactly as advertised, a massive chair constructed from the bones of rival alpha wolves who'd challenged for dominance and lost spectacularly. Skulls formed the back, femurs the arms, and the whole thing was held together with what Melis sincerely hoped was very old leather strapping and not anything more organic. Sitting on this monument to violence and questionable design choices was Ragnar Blackthorn, and Melis understood immediately why humans cowered and wolves submitted. He was, objectively speaking, stunning in the way natural disasters were stunning, beautiful, terrifying, and absolutely capable of killing you without trying particularly hard. 6'5" of solid muscle and barely contained predatory grace, he sat sprawled across his bone throne like a king who'd never questioned whether he deserved to rule. Dark hair fell to his shoulders in a way that looked both careless and strategic. Sharp cheekbones caught the torchlight, and his jaw could have been used to demonstrate geometric perfection. But it was his eyes that made your hindbrain scream warnings. Gold, like molten metal, like coins in firelight, like something that shouldn't exist in a human face and didn't because he was so thoroughly not human where it mattered. Those eyes tracked her approach with the focused intensity of an apex predator watching prey walk into the hunting ground. The guards brought her to the center of the hall and stepped back, leaving her alone before the throne while hundreds of wolves watched with the kind of attention usually reserved for execution entertainment. Ragnar studied her in silence for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice like gravel and honey, smooth and rough all at once. "A human who defied my beta." The words carried through the hall, somehow both lazy and commanding. Either very brave or very stupid. The old Melis, the one who'd lived a quiet life grinding herbs and avoiding attention, would have stayed silent. Would have lowered her eyes. Would have done everything possible to seem small and unthreatening. But that Melis had died in the village square when she'd said no to Fenrir. "False dichotomy," she replied, her voice steady and clear. "I could be neither. Or both. Or operating on information you don't have, which would make your assessment premature." The hall went silent. Someone in the back dropped their drinking horn, the clatter echoing off stone walls. Ragnar's gold eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication that she'd surprised him. "You know what happens to humans who speak to me that way? I imagine you tell me in great detail, probably with some theatrical growling, and then we waste everyone's time while you decide whether killing me is worth the paperwork." A muscle twitched in his jaw. Several wolves in the crowd shifted nervously, clearly anticipating their alpha king was about to demonstrate exactly what happened to mouthy humans. Instead, Ragnar leaned forward slightly, his gaze intensifying. "What's your name, human?" "Melis of Thornwick." "And tell me, Melis of Thornwick, do you have a death wish?" Or are you simply too ignorant to understand the danger you're in? Neither, she replied. I'm just tired of pretending to be afraid of men who think growling counts as conversation. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop several degrees. Pack members exchanged alarmed glances. Even the guards behind Melis took a subtle step back. Ragnar stood slowly, unfolding from his throne with predatory grace. He was somehow taller than she'd anticipated, broader, more solidly present in a way that made her instincts scream warnings her conscious mind was busy ignoring. He descended the dais steps with measured purpose, each footfall echoing through the silent hall. The pack watched, transfixed, as their alpha king approached the chained human girl who'd just insulted him to his face. When he reached her, he began to circle slowly, studying her from every angle like a predator assessing prey. She could feel his presence like heat against her skin, could hear his breathing, could sense his wolf pressing just beneath the surface. You're either cursed, blessed, or the best entertainment I've had in a century, he murmured, close enough that she could feel the words against her ear. Again with the false trichotomy, Melis muttered before her brain could stop her mouth. Do all alpha males think in threes? She felt rather than saw his smile, a dark, dangerous expression that promised either death or something equally complicated. And then his wolf surged forward. The change was instantaneous and overwhelming. The air pressure dropped, the temperature plummeted, and that primal, dominant force that made him alpha king of the most feared pack in the Northern Territories flooded the hall like a physical presence. His growls started low, building in intensity, a sound that seemed to vibrate through bone and blood and the very stones of the stronghold. It was the kind of sound that triggered every survival instinct evolution had gifted humanity, the kind that made you remember, very clearly and viscerally, that you were prey and something much, much more dangerous was close enough to end you. The entire pack bowed. Heads lowered, necks bent, that instinctive submission coded into their very DNA manifesting without conscious thought. Even the strongest wolves, the ones who stood at Ragnar's right hand, couldn't resist the compulsion of an alpha's dominance. Melis stood completely still, meeting his burning gold eyes, her expression suggesting she was mentally calculating her grocery list. The growl built to a thunderous roar that rattled the weapons on the walls, that made the torches flicker, that should have sent every living thing in the hall to their knees trembling. When it reached its peak, the moment when death seemed absolutely certain, Melis sighed. Be quiet. 2 words. Calm. Clear. Like she was shushing a library patron who'd forgotten their inside voice. The growl stopped. Not because Ragnar stopped growling, she could see his chest still heaving, his mouth still open, his wolf still raging just beneath his skin. But no sound emerged. Silence swallowed the hall whole, absolute and complete, as if the universe itself had decided to honor her request. For 3 heartbeats, the world held its breath. Then Ragnar Blackthorn threw his head back and laughed, a deep, echoing sound that rattled the stone walls, genuine and delighted and completely, utterly unhinged. Chapter 3. The Challenge. The laughter continued for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 15 seconds, long enough for the entire pack to question reality, their life choices, and whether their alpha king had finally snapped under the weight of 3 centuries of unchallenged power. Ragnar's gold eyes blazed with something that looked like fury and exhilaration had gotten drunk together and made questionable decisions. When his laughter finally subsided, he looked at Melis with an intensity that made her wonder if she'd miscalculated her survival odds. Make me, he said, his voice low and dangerous and somehow amused all at once. The 2 words hung in the air like a challenge, a threat, and possibly a flirtation, though Melis suspected that with alpha werewolves, those 3 things were probably synonymous. Before she could formulate a response that wouldn't get her immediately killed, Ragnar circled behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. You, he murmured near her ear, are either the bravest human I've ever met or the most suicidal. I haven't decided which. Why not both? Melis replied, proud that her voice remained steady despite the fact that her heart was trying to escape through her ribcage. I'm a multitasker. His laugh this time was quieter, darker, more intimate. I'm keeping you. I'm not a pet. No, Ragnar agreed, moving back around to face her. You're a challenge. And I haven't had one of those in far too long. He turned to address the hall, his voice carrying through the stunned silence. This human is under my personal protection. Anyone who harms her answers to me. Anyone who touches her dies slowly. Are we clear? The pack responded with a chorus of acknowledgments, though their expressions suggested significant confusion about this development in stronghold policy. Fenrir, standing near the throne, looked like someone had just informed him that gravity was optional. Alpha, she defied pack law. She insulted your beta. She made me laugh, Ragnar interrupted, his tone suggesting the conversation was over. When was the last time anyone in this hall made me laugh, Fenrir? The beta's jaw clenched, but he lowered his head in submission. As you command, Alpha. Ragnar gestured, and 2 guards moved forward to remove Melissa's silver shackles. The burns on her wrists were angry and red, but she refused to show any reaction as the metal came away. You'll have quarters in the East Wing, Ragnar informed her. Comfortable enough for a human, I suppose. Though if you try to escape, his smile showed too many teeth. Well, let's just say the chase would be entertaining for everyone except you. How reassuring. I'm not trying to be reassuring. I'm trying to be honest. He studied her with those unnerving gold eyes. Why aren't you afraid of me, Melis of Thornwick? It was a good question. A reasonable question. The kind of question that deserved an honest answer, which was precisely why she couldn't give one. Maybe I am afraid, she said instead. Maybe I just don't show it the way you expect. Or maybe, his hand shot out, gripping her chin gently but firmly, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. You're hiding something. Something that makes you think you're safe when you shouldn't be. Melis felt her blood freeze. The old gift stirred in her veins, responding to the proximity of a powerful alpha, wanting to rise, to command, to dominate the way her ancestors had centuries ago. She locked it down hard, building mental walls around the power that wanted to spill out. I'm a human in a werewolf stronghold, she said quietly. Nothing about this situation suggests safety. Ragnar held her gaze for another moment, then released her chin and stepped back. True. But you're also a human who silenced an alpha's growl with 2 words. That's not normal, Melis of Thornwick. That's not even possible. Maybe your growl just isn't as impressive as everyone says. The pack gasped collectively, an actual, audible gasp of horror at such blasphemy. Ragnar's expression remained unreadable for 2 seconds, then he smiled, a real smile this time, not the predatory one. Oh, I'm definitely keeping you. This is going to be entertaining. The quarters in the East Wing were, as promised, comfortable by prison standards. A large bed with actual linens, a fireplace that worked, windows with glass instead of just open holes in the wall, and a bathroom that suggested werewolves had discovered plumbing at some point in the last century. A she-wolf named Astrid was assigned as her guard? Escort? Executioner-in-waiting? The job description seemed flexible. Astrid was tall, lean, with sharp features and eyes that suggested she'd seen things that would make horror writers reconsider their career choices. She leaned against the doorframe, watching Melis examine her new accommodations. Most humans who come to the stronghold don't get quarters, Astrid observed. They get dungeons. Or graves. I'm very lucky then. Or very unlucky. Astrid's gaze was assessing. The Alpha King's interest isn't always a blessing. Melis turned from the window, where she'd been contemplating the very long drop to the ground below. Let me guess. You're going to tell me that he's dangerous, unpredictable, and I should be terrified? No. You should already know that. I'm going to tell you that he's also curious, which is worse. Astrid pushed off from the doorframe. Ragnar Blackthorn has ruled for 70 years. He's fought challenges from every major pack in the Northern Territories. He's survived assassination attempts, political coups, and at least one incident involving a very angry bear that we don't talk about. Sounds like a full life. My point is that nothing surprises him anymore. Nothing interests him. He goes through the motions of ruling because that's what Alpha Kings do, but there's no joy in it. Astrid's expression was difficult to read. Until today. Today, you made him laugh. You made him curious. That's either going to save your life or make your death much more complicated. After Astrid left, though Melis suspected she was just outside the door, Melis sat on the bed and tried to process the spectacular disaster her life had become. She was in the stronghold of the most dangerous werewolf pack in the Northern Territories. She'd somehow gained the personal attention of an alpha king who could kill her without effort. And she was sitting on a powder keg of ancient bloodline gifts that would absolutely get her executed if anyone discovered them. "This is fine," she muttered to herself. "Everything is completely fine." A knock at the door interrupted her spiral into panic. Before she could respond, it opened to reveal a young wolf, barely more than a teenager, carrying a tray of food. "The Alpha King sends his regards," the boy said, setting the tray on a small table. His hands trembled slightly, and his eyes kept darting to her face then away. "He says you must be hungry." "That's thoughtful. He also says if you try to poison yourself with the silverware, he'll be very disappointed." Of course he did. The boy hesitated at the door. "Is it true that you told the Alpha King to be quiet?" "It's true." "And he didn't kill you?" "Not yet," Melis replied. "But the day is young." The boy's expression was caught between awe and terror. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the craziest. Everyone keeps saying that." "I'm starting to think it's not a compliment." After he left, Melis examined the food: roasted meat, vegetables, bread that was still warm. It smelled delicious and looked entirely unpoisoned, which was either good news or disappointingly anticlimactic depending on how you looked at it. She ate mechanically, her mind racing through possibilities and problems. She needed to understand the political landscape here, needed to figure out who might be her allies and who would happily watch her die. Most importantly, she needed to keep her bloodline gift hidden while navigating the attention of an alpha king who already suspected she was hiding something. "No pressure," she muttered around a mouthful of bread. The next morning, or what she assumed was morning in a fortress where most of the inhabitants were nocturnal predators, Astrid arrived with clothes that were significantly nicer than Melis's travel-stained village dress. "The Alpha King requests your presence at breakfast," Astrid announced, laying out a deep blue dress that looked like it cost more than Melis's entire cottage back home. "Requests or demands? With Ragnar, is there a difference?" The breakfast hall was smaller than the Great Hall, but still managed to convey, "We could kill you in here and no one would hear you scream." Long tables filled with pack members looked up as Melis entered, their conversations dying into whispers. Ragnar sat at the head table, flanked by his senior wolves. He watched her approach with those unnerving gold eyes, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Melis of Thornwick," he greeted her. "I trust you slept well?" "As well as anyone imprisoned in a werewolf fortress can sleep." "You're not imprisoned. You're a guest. Is there a difference?" His smile widened. "Apparently not." He gestured to the empty seat beside him. "Sit. Eat. Try not to insult anyone before I've had my coffee." The meal was surreal. Pack members kept stealing glances at her, whispering behind their hands. Fenrir, seated farther down the table, looked like he was chewing on broken glass instead of breakfast. And Ragnar seemed to be enjoying the entire spectacle with the enthusiasm of someone who'd finally found quality entertainment. "Tell me about Thornwick," Ragnar said between bites. "What does a human do in a border village?" "Survive, mostly. It's very time-consuming." "I meant, what did you do for work?" "I worked at the apothecary. Grinding herbs, mixing tinctures, occasionally treating illnesses when the actual healer was drunk." "Which was often." "So you're educated then?" Melis hesitated. This was dangerous territory. Too much knowledge could raise questions. "My grandmother taught me to read. The herbs I learned by practice." "Your grandmother?" Ragnar's gaze sharpened. "The old woman in the square. She seemed afraid for you." "More than the others." "Most grandmothers are afraid when their granddaughters are dragged away in chains by werewolves. It's fairly standard grandmother behavior." "But she said something about old blood." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "What did she mean?" Melis's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression neutral. "She's old. Sometimes she says things that don't make sense. Family legends, Ancient superstitions, you know how elderly humans get. Ragnar studied her for a long moment, and Melis was absolutely certain he didn't believe her. But before he could press further, a commotion at the hall entrance interrupted them. A wolf in travel-stained clothes burst in, his face flushed with urgency. Alpha. News from the eastern border. The Shadow Fawn Pack. Not here, Ragnar interrupted sharply, standing. He glanced at Melis. We'll continue this conversation later. Astrid, keep our guest entertained. As he strode from the hall with his senior wolves following, Melis released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That was close, Astrid murmured, appearing at her elbow. He knows you're hiding something. Everyone's hiding something. Yes, but most people don't hide things that make an alpha king curious. That's how you end up very thoroughly investigated. Astrid guided her from the hall. Come on. If you're going to survive here, you need to understand how the pack works. The next 3 days fell into a strange rhythm. Astrid became something between guard and reluctant friend, showing Melis the stronghold's layout and explaining pack dynamics with the weariness of someone who'd seen too much political drama. The pack is divided into 3 main factions, Astrid explained as they walked through a courtyard where young wolves practiced combat. The traditionalists, led by Fenrir, believe in the old ways, absolute alpha dominance, human subjugation, territorial expansion through violence. They think Ragnar's been too soft lately. Soft? Melis watched as 2 wolves grappled in the training ring, their movements brutal and efficient. This is soft. Comparatively. 20 years ago, Ragnar would have burned your village to the ground for defiance. Now he just demands excessive tribute and makes examples of people occasionally. It's basically pacifism by werewolf standards. How progressive. Then there's the pragmatists, led by Ragnar's advisor, Henrik. They think sustainable resource extraction is more profitable than constant warfare. Turns out you can't collect tribute from corpses or burned villages. Revolutionary thinking. And the third faction? Astrid's expression darkened. The reformists. Small but growing. They think the old territorial wars need to end, that humans and wolves could potentially coexist peacefully. They're very idealistic and very stupid. Why stupid? Because suggesting peace makes you weak in the eyes of the traditionalists. And weakness gets you killed. Astrid stopped walking, turning to face Melis directly. You need to understand something. The only reason you're alive is because Ragnar finds you interesting. The moment that changes, the moment you become boring or predictable, you're just another human in a fortress full of predators. That night, Melis dreamed of her grandmother's stories. Tales of the Silvermane family, of humans who could speak to wolves in the language of dominance and submission. Of the Purge, when the territorial wars began and power-hungry alphas decided mediators were too dangerous to exist. She woke to find Ragnar standing at her window, silhouetted against the moonlight. Jesus, she sat up, heart racing. Do you people not believe in knocking? I'm the Alpha King. Knocking is beneath me. He didn't turn from the window. Can't sleep. I could until you decided to lurk ominously in my room. I don't lurk. I observe. That's literally what lurking is. His laugh was quiet, more exhale than sound. You're not afraid of me. We've established this. No, we've established that you hide it well. But now... He finally turned, his gold eyes catching the moonlight. Now I'm starting to think you genuinely aren't afraid. Which brings me back to my original question. Why? Melis pulled the blanket up, more for psychological protection than physical. Maybe I'm just tired of being afraid. Maybe I decided that if I'm going to die anyway, I might as well die on my own terms. Noble sentiment. Stupid, but noble. He moved closer, and she fought the urge to retreat. Or maybe you know something I don't. Maybe you have some secret that makes you think you're safe. The old blood stirred in response to his proximity, to his alpha presence pressing against her senses. She could feel his wolf, powerful, ancient, dominant, and her gift wanted desperately to reach out, to test its strength against his. She locked it down so hard her teeth hurt. I'm a human girl from a border village, she said quietly. What secret could I possibly have that would matter to the Alpha King of the Ireclaw Pack? Ragnar reached out, his hand hovering near her face, but not quite touching. That's what I intend to find out. Then he was gone, moving with that supernatural speed that reminded her exactly what he was. Melis sat in the darkness, her heart hammering, the old blood singing in her veins with warnings and wants she couldn't afford to acknowledge. This was becoming complicated. Chapter 4. The Hunt. The invitation came 3 days later, delivered by a smirking Fenrir who looked like he'd just been given permission to do violence. "The Alpha King requests your presence on the hunt," he announced, standing in her doorway with his arms crossed. "Tomorrow at dawn." "What kind of hunt?" Melis asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. "The kind where we chase things through the forest and kill them." Fenrir's smile showed too many teeth. "It's very bonding. Very traditional. Very dangerous for humans who can't keep up." After he left, Astrid appeared with practical hunting clothes and a grim expression. "This is a test," she said, helping Melis into leather pants and a sturdy tunic. "Ragnar wants to see how you handle yourself outside the stronghold walls. And if I fail the test? Then the forest gets a new corpse, and I get assigned to someone less interesting." Astrid's tone was light, but her eyes were serious. "Don't fail." Dawn came too early and too cold. Melis joined the hunting party in the courtyard, 24 wolves in various stages of excitement and bloodlust. Ragnar stood at the center, magnificent in black leather and confidence, his gold eyes bright with anticipation. "The rules are simple," he announced. "We hunt until we've brought down enough game to feed the pack for a week. Everyone participates. Everyone contributes." His gaze found Melis. "Even our human guest." "How generous," she muttered. They shifted, all of them except Ragnar, and suddenly the courtyard was filled with massive wolves in dozens of colors. The transformation was more fluid than Fenrir's had been, practiced and graceful, less horror show and more deadly ballet. Ragnar remained human, though his eyes had gone full wolf gold. He gestured to a horse being led forward, a massive black stallion that looked like it had anger management issues. "You'll ride," he told Melis. "Try to keep up." Then he shifted, and Melis understood why everyone called him Alpha King. His wolf was enormous, easily twice the size of the others, black as midnight with eyes that burned gold like miniature suns. Power radiated from him in waves, that primal dominance that made every other wolf in the courtyard lower their heads in instinctive submission. He was beautiful and terrifying and absolutely deadly. The horse screamed and tried to bolt. Melis grabbed the reins, her gift rising instinctively to calm the animal. She pushed it back down quickly, but not before the horse settled, its eyes glazing slightly with unnatural calm. Several wolves noticed. Fenrir's wolf eyes narrowed with suspicion. Then Ragnar howled, and the hunt began. They ran through the forest like a living tide of fur and fangs, moving with coordinated precision that came from centuries of hunting together. Melis urged her horse forward, branches whipping past, the thundering of paws and hoofs creating a rhythm that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Ragnar's black wolf led the pack, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. He glanced back periodically, those gold eyes finding her in the chaos, checking that she was keeping up. The first kill came within an hour, a massive elk brought down by 3 wolves working in concert. They fed briefly, then continued, the hunt becoming more than a simple necessity. This was ritual, tradition, a reminder of what they were beneath the veneer of human form. By midday, they'd brought down enough games to fulfill the quota. The pack settled in a clearing to rest, shifting back to human form with varying degrees of modesty. Melis dismounted, her legs shaking from hours in the saddle. Ragnar appeared beside her, human again, barely winded. "You did well." "I sat on a horse. Not exactly heroic." "You kept up." "Many humans couldn't." He studied her with that intensity that made her skin prickle. "You're also good with animals." "The horse obeyed you unusually well." "I've always had a way with them." The sound was non-committal but skeptical. "Come. There's something I want to show you." He led her away from the pack, deeper into the forest. Melis knew she should probably be concerned about being alone with him in the woods, but curiosity won out over self-preservation, a recurring theme in her life lately. They walked in silence until they reached a clearing where ancient stones stood in a circle, covered in moss and carved with symbols that made Melis's blood run cold. She knew these symbols, had seen them in her grandmother's hidden texts. This was a sacred site, Ragnar said quietly. 300 years ago, before the territorial wars, humans and wolves would meet here to negotiate, to trade, to resolve disputes peacefully. Why are you showing me this? Because I found records in the Stronghold archive. Old treaties, ancient agreements. He turned to face her. The mediators, the families who could bridge the gap between human and wolf. Do you know what happened to them? Melis's mouth went dry. They died out, I assume. They were hunted. Systematically. By every major pack in the Northern Territories, including mine. His expression was unreadable. My grandfather led the purge. He believed that humans who could command wolves were too dangerous to exist, that they threatened the natural order of alpha dominance. Why are you telling me this? Because I think he was wrong. Ragnar moved closer. I think we lost something important when we killed the mediators. I think the territorial wars have cost us more than we've gained. That sounds suspiciously like reformist thinking. Perhaps. His hand came up to cup her face, gentle despite the strength she could feel coiled in his muscles. Or perhaps I'm just tired of ruling through fear alone. Perhaps I'm wondering what else might be possible. The old blood surged in response to his touch, to his proximity, to the alpha power that called to her gift like steel to lodestone. She could feel his wolf, powerful and ancient, pressing against her senses. Could feel the tether of dominance that connected him to every pack member. And beneath it all, she felt something else, a resonance, a recognition, as if her bloodline and his were speaking a language that predated words. Melis. His voice was soft, dangerous. What are you? Before she could answer, before she had to lie or reveal the truth that would either save or damn her, a howl split the air. Not a hunt call. An alarm. Ragnar's head snapped up, his body going tense. Shadow Fawn Pack. They're on our territory. He shifted in an instant, his clothes shredding as the massive black wolf emerged. Another howl, this one furious and commanding, and he was gone, racing back toward the hunting party. Melis stood alone in the clearing, her heart hammering, the old symbols seeming to glow in her peripheral vision. The Shadow Fawn Pack. She'd heard stories, a rival pack from the eastern mountains, known for their brutality and their alpha's ambition. If they were here, it meant war. She ran back toward the clearing where they'd left the others, branches tearing at her clothes, her breath coming in gasps. She could hear fighting ahead, snarls, yelps, the meaty sounds of bodies colliding. The clearing had become a battlefield. Shadowfang wolves, gray and scarred and vicious, had ambushed the hunting party. The Ireclaw wolves fought back with desperate efficiency, but they were outnumbered and separated from their full strength. Ragnar's black wolf was in the center of it all, a whirlwind of teeth and fury, but even he couldn't be everywhere at once. Melis saw Astrid go down, blood blooming across her shoulder. Saw young Eric, the boy who'd brought her food that first night, surrounded by 3 Shadowfang wolves, his eyes wide with terror. The old blood surged, demanding release. 3 centuries of suppression, of hiding, of pretending to be powerless, it all pressed against her mental walls, wanting out. Don't, she whispered to herself. Don't reveal it. Stay hidden. Eric screamed as teeth found his leg. And Melis's walls shattered. Stop. The word emerged as something between command and roar, powered by 3 centuries of bloodline gifts that had been waiting for this moment. It resonated through the clearing like a physical force, like thunder given voice and purpose. Every wolf froze. Not submission, this was deeper than that. This was the old magic, the ancient binding that had once connected human mediators to wolf packs. Every wolf in the clearing, Ireclaw and Shadowfang alike, stopped mid-attack, their eyes glazing with confusion and compulsion. In the sudden silence, Melis walked forward, her voice steady despite the fact that her entire world had just tilted sideways. Leave, she told the Shadowfang wolves. Now. And don't return to Ireclaw territory. They left. 30 battle-hardened werewolves turned and fled into the forest like chastened dogs, compelled by a command they couldn't resist. The Ireclaw wolves remained frozen, their eyes wide with shock and, in some cases, terror. Millie's turned to where Ragnar stood in wolf form, his gold eyes blazing with recognition and something else. Something that might have been triumph, or might have been fury, or might have been both. When he shifted back to human form, he was smiling, a sharp, dangerous expression that made her stomach drop. "Well," he said softly, "that answers several questions." Around them, the pack began to shift back, whispers spreading like wildfire. She heard the word Silvermane repeated, heard Old Blood, heard Mediator spoken with equal parts awe and fear. Fenrir shifted back, his face twisted with rage. "She's an abomination." The Mediators were hunted for a reason. They threaten pack law, threaten alpha dominance. "She saved your life," Ragnar countered, his voice cold. "Or did you not notice the 3 wolves about to tear out your throat? Better dead then." Enough. The single word carried absolute authority. Ragnar's eyes hadn't left Melis. "Everyone back to the stronghold. Now. We'll discuss this in the Great Hall." As the pack began gathering their wounded and preparing to leave, Ragnar approached Melis. She stood frozen, the weight of exposure crushing down on her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did." He circled her slowly, like he had that first night in the throne room. "You meant to save them. Which means despite everything, despite knowing what you are, could get you killed, you couldn't stand by and watch people die. Are you going to execute me?" "That depends." He stopped in front of her, his hand coming up to tilt her face toward his. "Are you going to try to command me?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. She could feel his wolf, powerful and waiting, could feel the tether of dominance that connected him to every pack member. Could she command him? The Alpha King himself? Probably. The Old Blood sang with certainty, recognizing the challenge. "No," she said quietly. "I won't." "Why not? You could probably take control of the entire pack. Could make yourself queen of the Northern Territories. Because that's not what the gift is for. The Mediators weren't meant to rule. They were meant to bridge the gap, to translate between human and wolf." She met his eyes steadily. "And because forcing someone to submit isn't the same as earning their respect." For a long moment, he studied her. Then, slowly, he smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. "My grandfather hunted your family to extinction because he was afraid," Ragnar said quietly. "Afraid that humans who could command wolves threatened his power. But I think he was just afraid of change." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "I'm not my grandfather." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the old ways are dying. The territorial wars are bleeding us dry. The humans grow stronger while we fight among ourselves." His gold eyes burned with intensity. "I'm saying that perhaps the Mediators were killed not because they were dangerous, but because they offered a different kind of power. The kind that doesn't need violence to maintain authority." "Ragnar. I'm also saying that you're still my challenge. Still my guest. Still under my protection." His smile turned sharp. "But now you're also the most valuable, and most controversial, person in the Northern Territories. So things are about to get very complicated. More complicated than they already were?" "Oh, Melis of Thornwick," his laugh was dark with promise. "You have no idea." Chapter 5. The Old Laws. The Great Hall was in chaos when they returned. Word of what had happened in the forest had spread with supernatural speed, and by the time the hunting party arrived at the stronghold, the entire pack had assembled in various states of outrage, fear, and fascination. Melis stood before Ragnar's bone throne once again, but this time the atmosphere was entirely different. Last time, she'd been a curiosity, a mouthy human who'd somehow survived insulting an Alpha King. Now she was something else entirely, a living link to a past the wolves had tried to erase. "She's Silvermane." Fenrir's voice carried over the din, "the very bloodline we purged 3 centuries ago. She threatens everything we've built." "She saved half our hunting party," Henrik countered, the pragmatist advisor stepping forward. "Including you, Fenrir, whether you're grateful or not. I didn't ask to be saved by a human's unnatural magic." No, you were too busy being surrounded by Shadowfang wolves to ask for anything. The argument escalated, wolves taking sides, voices rising in anger and accusation. Through it all, Ragnar sat on his throne, watching with those unreadable gold eyes, letting the chaos play out. Finally, he stood, and the hall fell silent. 300 years ago, Ragnar began, his voice carrying through the massive space. My grandfather led the purge of the mediator families. The Silvermans, the Moo Whispers, the Thornwick line, all hunted to extinction or driven into hiding. He believed they threatened pack law, threatened alpha dominance, threatened everything we held sacred. He descended the dais steps slowly, his gaze sweeping the assembled pack. And what did we gain from their deaths? 3 centuries of war. Constant challenges for territory. Humans who fear and hate us. Resources stretched thin from endless fighting. Power maintained only through violence and intimidation. He stopped in the center of the hall. Is that truly what we want? More of the same? Another 3 centuries of blood. The old ways maintained order. Fenrir protested. Strength through dominance, peace through fear. That's not peace, Melis interrupted, surprising herself. All eyes turned to her. That's just everyone being too terrified to fight back until they're desperate enough or angry enough or numerous enough. Then the violence comes anyway, worse than before. And what would you know about maintaining order? Fenrir sneered. You're human. Weak. Your kind exists only because we allow it. My kind outnumbers yours 20-1, Melis replied calmly. We have weapons you can't imagine, cities with populations larger than your entire pack. We've built civilizations that span continents. The only reason we haven't destroyed you is because most humans don't believe you exist, and the ones who do prefer to stay out of your territory. She took a step forward. You're not dominant because you're stronger. You're isolated because you're feared. There's a difference. The hall erupted again, wolves shouting over each other. But Melis caught sight of faces in the crowd, younger wolves, mostly, watching her with expressions that weren't hostile. Curious. Thoughtful. Maybe even hopeful. Ragnar raised his hand, and silence fell again. There is another option, he said quietly. The old laws, the ones written before the purge, still exist. Buried in the archive, but legally binding if invoked. Henrik's eyes widened. Alpha, you can't mean. The law of binding, Ragnar continued. When a mediator bloodline proved their gift through an act of preservation, saving wolf lives at personal risk, they could be bonded to a pack. Not as a servant or prisoner, but as a voice and bridge between human and wolf. That law was abolished. Fenrir protested. No. It was ignored. There's a difference. Ragnar's gold eyes found Melis. The law of binding required the mediator's consent and the alpha's claim. Both parties had to agree willingly, without coercion. Melis felt her heart hammering against her ribs. What exactly does binding entail? You would become part of the pack, protected by pack law, bound by pack loyalty. Your bloodline gift would be formally recognized, your authority as mediator established. His gaze intensified. And you would be bound to me specifically. The mediator to the alpha. 2 halves of leadership, strength and wisdom, dominance and diplomacy. That sounds suspiciously like marriage. The binding predates that human custom, but there are similarities. A slight smile played on his lips. You would share my authority. Stand at my side in all pack matters. Your words would carry the weight of my power. And in exchange? In exchange, you help me transform the Ironclaw pack. End the territorial wars. Build something new. He moved closer, his voice dropping. Help me prove that my grandfather was wrong, that strength doesn't require constant violence, that wolves and humans can coexist without one enslaving the other. It was everything Melis had never known she wanted and everything she'd been raised to fear. The old blood sang in her veins, recognizing the rightness of it. A mediator and an alpha, balanced power, the way it was meant to be. But she also knew what it would cost. The traditionalists will revolt, she said quietly. Fenrir and his faction, they'll see this as weakness. Let them. Ragnar's smile was sharp. I've been waiting for an excuse to root out the truly problematic elements of my pack. This will force them to choose, adapt or leave. or challenge you for leadership. Then I'll remind them why I'm Alpha King." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. "But I won't force this, Melis. The binding requires your consent, freely given. If you refuse, I'll protect you as I promised, but you'll remain what you are now, a guest, a curiosity, always slightly outside pack law. And if I agree? If you agree, you become mine. And I become yours. For better or worse, until one of us dies or willingly breaks the bond." The hall was silent, every wolf watching this exchange with bated breath. Melis could feel the weight of history pressing down, 3 centuries of violence and fear and suppression, all hinging on this moment. She thought of her grandmother, of the stories told in whispers about the mediator families. Thought of the hidden texts in the cellar, the old laws written in languages that predated kingdoms. Thought of the gift she'd spent a decade hiding, suppressing, pretending didn't exist. And she thought of the young wolves in the crowd, watching with hope in their eyes. Of Astrid, who'd become an unexpected friend. Of Eric, who would have died in that forest if she'd stayed hidden. The old laws, she began, and saw Ragnar's eyes flash with anticipation. They required a trial period, didn't they? 3 moons to prove compatibility, to ensure the binding served the pack's interest. Surprise flickered across his face, then respect. "You've read the original texts. My grandmother kept them. Just in case the old blood surfaced again." Smart woman. Ragnar's smile widened. "Yes. 3 moons to prove the binding benefits the pack. If at the end either party wishes to dissolve it, they may do so without consequence. Then I agree. To the trial. To the binding, with the understanding that we both have 3 moons to decide if this is truly what we want." The hall exploded in reaction, cheers from some, outrage from others. Fenrir looked like he wanted to challenge right then and there, but Henrik laid a restraining hand on his shoulder, whispering urgently. Ragnar's smile was triumphant and possessive and absolutely feral. "Then let it be witnessed by the pack. I, Ragnar Blackthorn, Alpha King of the Ireclaw Pack, claim Melis of Thornwick Silvermane as my mediator and bonded mate. For 3 moons, we trial this binding. At the end, we choose, together or apart." He pulled a knife from his belt, ceremonial, she realized, with a handle carved from bone and wrapped in silver wire. The blade gleamed in the torchlight as he drew it across his palm, blood welling dark against his skin. "Your turn," he said quietly, offering her the knife. Melis took it, her hand surprisingly steady. The blade was sharp, she barely felt the cut as it opened her palm. Ragnar took her bleeding hand in his, their blood mingling. "Blood to blood," he intoned. "Wolf to mediator. Alpha to voice. Bound by choice, sealed by moon, witnessed by pack." The old magic surged through contact, ancient power recognizing ancient ritual. Melis gasped as it flooded through her, not painful, but overwhelming. She felt Ragnar's wolf like a living presence in her mind, powerful and predatory, but also protective, possessive. Hers in a way she didn't fully understand. And she felt the pack, hundreds of connections blooming through the bond, tethers of loyalty and dominance that now included her. Not as strongly as Ragnar's connection, but present. Real. Undeniable. When the magic settled, Ragnar was smiling at her expression. "Overwhelming, isn't it? That's one word for it. You'll get used to it." He released her hand, the cut already healing with supernatural speed. "Welcome to the pack, Melis of Thornwick Silvermane." The hall erupted in howls, some celebratory, some clearly furious, all acknowledging the binding that had just taken place. As the chaos swirled around them, Ragnar leaned close to her ear. 3 moons to change the world. Think that's enough time? Melis looked at the pack, at the traditionalists glaring with barely contained rage, at the pragmatists watching with cautious hope, at the young reformists whose eyes shone with possibility. Then she looked at Ragnar, at the Alpha King who'd just risked everything on a human girl with forbidden bloodline gifts. "It's either enough time," she said, "or just enough time to get us both killed." His laugh was warm against her ear. "Wouldn't have it any other way." Epilogue. The first moon of the binding period brought exactly the chaos everyone had predicted. Fenrir and 24 traditionalist wolves left the pack in dramatic fashion, swearing they'd return when true pack law was restored. Ragnar let them go with a warning that returning meant submission or death. The Shadowfang pack sent an emissary, testing the waters, seeing if the rumors of a silver mane mediator bonded to the Ireclaw Alpha were true. Melis had the pleasure of sending him back with a message that war would cost far more than peace, delivered in a tone that made the emissary's wolf whimper. Henrik proved surprisingly supportive, helping Melis navigate pack politics, while Ragnar dealt with border skirmishes and territorial disputes. Astrid became her constant companion and fiercest defender, apparently having decided that anyone who could make the Alpha King laugh was worth protecting. And Ragnar was complicated. He'd moved her into quarters adjoining his for convenience, he claimed, though the look in his eyes suggested other motivations. They spent evenings in his study, poring over the old texts, planning how to transform centuries of violence into something resembling stability. The other packs will test us, Henrik warned during one strategy session. They'll see the binding as weakness, as the Alpha King going soft. Let them test, Ragnar replied, his hand finding Melis's under the table, their still healing cuts touching. They'll learn quickly enough. By the second month, 3 smaller packs had sent emissaries requesting Melis's mediation for territorial disputes that had been bloody stalemates for decades. She resolved 2 successfully and walked away from the third when both sides proved more interested in violence than solutions. You can't save everyone, Ragnar told her that night, finding her staring out the window of her quarters. But I have to try. That's what the gift is for bridge building, not forcing submission. I know. He came up behind her, his warmth solid against her back. That's why this might actually work. Might be the operative word. Melis. He turned her to face him, his gold eyes serious. I've ruled through fear and dominance for 70 years. It's effective, but it's also exhausting. Lonely. Always wondering who's planning the next challenge, who's plotting rebellion, who's just waiting for a moment of weakness to strike. And now? Now I have someone who can tell me be quiet and mean it. His smile was soft, genuine. Someone who sees me as Ragnar, not just Alpha King. Someone who chose this bond freely, not out of fear or ambition. The third moon arrived with autumn storms and a crisis that would test everything they'd built. Fenrir returned with mercenaries from the northern clans, wolves who fought for coin rather than pack, who had no loyalty beyond payment. They attacked at dawn, hitting the stronghold's eastern gate with coordinated precision. He's hired the Blade Wolf Company, Henrik reported grimly as alarms rang through the fortress. 50 of the most vicious fighters in the territories. How many do we have inside the stronghold? Ragnar demanded, already moving toward the armory. Maybe 80, but half are young or untrained. Then we make do. Ragnar turned to Melis. Stay here. The inner quarters are defended. Absolutely not. His eyes flashed. This isn't a debate. You're right, it's not. Melis met his gaze steadily. I'm your bonded mediator. Where you go, I go. That's how this works. For a moment, they stared at each other, alpha dominance meeting mediator certainty. Then Ragnar's expression shifted into something like pride. Then stay close and don't do anything stupidly heroic. I make no promises. The battle was brutal and chaotic. Fenrir's mercenaries fought with cold efficiency, caring nothing for pack bonds or honor, just violence and coin. The Ireclaw wolves fought with desperate determination, protecting their home, their alpha, their future. Melis stood in the courtyard center, and for the first time in her life, she fully unleashed the old blood. Stop. The command resonated through the courtyard, through the very stones of the stronghold. Mercenaries froze mid-attack, their eyes glazing with confusion and compulsion. This was the power her ancestors had wielded, not to dominate, but to halt violence before it consumed everything. But Fenrir had prepared. He wore silver-laced leather armor that somehow disrupted her command, letting him move when others couldn't. Clever, he snarled, stalking toward her. But expensive. Worth every coin to see your new world order die. Ragnar moved to intercept, but 3 mercenaries blocked his path, also wearing disruption armor, she realized. Fenrir had planned this carefully. The Alpha King's pet human, Fenrir continued, circling her like prey. Do you know what we'll do to you after we kill him? What example will we make of the last silver mane? You talk too much, Melis replied, her mind racing. The command didn't work on him directly, but the armor wasn't perfect. She could feel its edges, its limitations. And you're going to die screaming. Melis didn't command him. She commanded his armor. Break. The silver-laced leather exploded outward, clasps snapping, bindings tearing. For one moment, Fenrir was unprotected, his wolf exposed to her gift. Kneel. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings, his wolf forced into submission by 3 centuries of mediator power finally unleashed. His eyes went wide with shock and fury, but his body wouldn't obey him. Around the courtyard, mercenaries began collapsing as her initial command caught up with them. Without Fenrir's leadership, without the promise of payment, they had no reason to die here. Ragnar dispatched the 3, blocking him with brutal efficiency, then stood before Fenrir's kneeling form. You betrayed your pack, he said quietly. Brought mercenaries against your own blood. Tried to kill your alpha and his bonded mediator. His gold eyes were cold, merciless. Give me one reason I shouldn't end you right now. Because, Melis said, releasing Fenrir from her command, we're trying to build something different. Something that doesn't require killing everyone who disagrees with us. Fenrir rose slowly, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. You think mercy makes you strong? You're weak. Both of you. And weakness gets you killed. Then leave, Ragnar said. Take your mercenaries and go. Try this again, and there won't be mercy. Try this again, and I'll show you why I'm Alpha King. Fenrir left, his pride shattered, his rebellion crushed. The mercenaries followed. There was no payment forthcoming from a defeated challenger. In the aftermath, as the pack tended their wounded and repaired the damage, Melis found Ragnar standing at the stronghold's highest tower, looking out over the valley. 3 moons are up tomorrow, he said quietly as she joined him. Time to choose, bond permanent or dissolved. Together or apart. Melis felt the connection between them, forged in blood and magic and 3 moons of chaos. She felt his wolf, powerful and protective. Felt the pack, dozens of connections that now included her, needed her, wanted her. And she felt something else, something the old texts had mentioned, but she'd never quite believed. The binding didn't just connect the mediator to Alpha. It connected heart to heart, soul to soul. She'd fallen in love with a werewolf king, which was either the most romantic thing ever or the most ridiculous. Possibly both. The pack is stabilizing, she said. 3 disputes mediated successfully. The younger wolves are responding well to combined leadership. Even some of the traditionalists are coming around. That's not what I asked. I know. She turned to face him, this impossible man who'd laughed at her defiance and claimed her as his challenge. You asked what I chose. And I choose you. I choose us. I choose this wild, chaotic, terrifying attempt to change 3 centuries of violence into something better. His smile was blinding. Even though it might get you killed? Especially because it might get us killed. She reached up, her hand cupping his face. Besides, someone needs to keep telling you to be quiet when your growling gets excessive. His laugh rumbled through his chest. And someone needs to keep growling at you when you're being too reasonable. So we're doing this? Making it permanent. We're doing this. He pulled her close, his warmth solid and real. You and me against centuries of stupidity and everyone who thinks the old ways are the only ways. Sounds impossible. Good thing we're both stubborn. The binding ceremony took place 3 days later, this time permanent, sealed with blood and magic and witnessed by a pack that was slowly transforming into something new. Not everyone approved, some wolves left, unwilling to accept a mediator's authority. But more stayed, curious and hopeful and ready for change. As Melis stood beside Ragnar before the assembled pack, their hands clasped and bleeding, their bond sealing permanent in ways both magical and mundane, she thought of her grandmother. Thought of the old woman who'd spent years teaching her to hide, to suppress, to stay safe. And she thought of the words Alara had whispered that night in the village square, the old blood runs true, blessed or cursed. Neither, Melis had said then. Just inconvenient. But standing here, bound to an alpha king, about to transform centuries of violence into something resembling hope, she realized her grandmother had been wrong. The old blood wasn't blessed or cursed or even inconvenient. It was necessary. And for the first time in 3 centuries, a silver mane mediator stood openly beside an alpha king, refusing to hide, refusing to be quiet, refusing to let fear dictate the future. The northern territories were about to change. And it all started because one human girl had told the alpha king to be quiet, and he laughed and growled, "Make me." Sometimes, the best love stories begin with absolutely terrible life decisions. This one was no exception. The end.
If this story resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it.